Hello, interweb. It is I, once again, Mr. Hosking, here to talk to you more about industrialization. Today, I'd like to focus on two topics. One we're going to talk about is the industrialization of cities and then the spreading of industrialization a little bit. What happens to cities when we industrialize? We talked about earlier, it's the move from an agrarian society into being part of a urban society or manufacturing society. So people are going to move from rural areas like sparsely populated farming villages into heavily populated or densely populated cities where now these manufacturing jobs are located so that they can work. We're going to see people have less space to live. People are going to have to purchase food from others so that they have something to eat. And we're going to see, that this move causes a lot of problems to start until we figure out how to deal with a lot of the problems. Specifically, if you think about people living in rural society, what might be dirty but still acceptable living in the countryside. Now, if you take that into the city and have a lot of people in small areas, and you still live like that, it's going to cause a lot of issues, especially with disease spreading. So, changes the way of life. It leads to economic growth and urbanization. The number of cities in the world from 1800 to 1850 go from 22 to 47. So places where 100,000 people live in a small area more than doubles. We're going to see a huge explosion in people living in cities because of those farming improvements, the techniques in farming that allows less people to work on farms. Now they can move and do other things in the cities. It's going to create a divide in wealth. This divide in wealth has really always existed. There's always a difference between the haves and have-nots. It's just how that division is decided. If we talk about before the French Revolution, where we have the first estate and the second estate, it's that nobility and the church, and those people have a lot of stuff, and then the third estate, everybody else is kind of stuck with nothing. Well, now there's this change with the Industrial Revolution, and the money really is going to go to those entrepreneurial risk takers and people who own the factories. And so we're going to see the divide now between the owners of the factories and the workers. And that's going to be this class divide that starts causing all of these problems. Factory owners are going to be super wealthy. They're going to live lavish lives, where factory workers are going to be completely mistreated and not really have anything. They're going to live really poor, unsanitary lives where they're living in small, crowded areas without flowing water, without proper toilets, without proper food to eat. They're going to work long hours every day. They're going to work in poor factory conditions, poor lighting, dangerous, working with machines that have no safety features on them, and no sympathy really from the owners of factories for those poor workers. If a worker gets hurt, if a worker gets sick, if you don't show up to work, you're fired. There's no sympathy there because there are so many workers that they're easily replaceable. We're going to see that this early movement in factorization really has little compassion, and it also has an enormous amount of labor, so that labor is like a dime a dozen. You can pay people really cheap because if they don't want to do that work, there's somebody else that will replace them for that amount of money. So it creates a really poor condition for the workers to start off with in the Industrial Revolution. Oh no, why did that happen? I don't know. As divisions grow, class tensions escalate, and there's this young man that we're going to get to by the name of Karl Marx, who's going to really focus on these problems. But other people also talk about it. If you ever have the chance to read Charles Dickens, he grows up in London during this industrialization change, and he talks about the problems with industrialization. So in his famous book, A Tale of Two Cities, he starts off, the opening line of the book is, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Like, this is a great time of growth, this is a great time of production, this is a great time of expansion in Europe, but it's also the worst of times. For the poor people, it gets really, really bad. To use a city as an example, in England, Manchester. Some of you soccer fans might know Manchester United. That they are in the city of Manchester. It's still around today. From 1801 to 1871, the population grows 5 times in Manchester. It goes from 93,000 people to 476,000 people in 70 years. This is an explosion of population. It's a lot of people coming together in a very short period of time, overpopulating an area. They moved there for the mills. It's a textile plant. Factories grow. Great wealth for the factory owners and the factory workers. Well, they're going to really have a hard environment to work in. Textile machines are really dangerous. They have really fast spinning parts. They have sharp parts. And if there are jams, you have to try and unjam it, putting your hand in by the sharp machine. And once it's unjammed, it starts really fast. And so that your hand can get caught, it's a really, really hard environment. We also see child labor. A lot of the machines have small parts or small areas where you have to get in to get rid of the jams. So they would send kids in to get rid of the jams. And then the machine would start and that kid would be trapped down there and die. And, well, c'est la vie, one less mouth to feed, I guess. Hazardous conditions. I said it, very, very unsafe. And super polluting. In Manchester, they used to run the factories on coal power. And coal, just burning straight coal without scrubbing the smokestacks at all, creates a really, really dark pollution and a lot of ash and soot. It was so bad in England at one point that it caused an evolutionary change in the pigeons. The pigeons went from completely white to speckled so that they could hide from predatory birds that were trying to kill them. And it happened very, very quickly because of pollution. uh, Industrialization spreads. It's not just going to stay in England, although England does try to keep manufacturing and industrialization in England as long as possible. They tried to keep the secrets of steam engine and steam power a secret from the rest of the world so that nobody else had industrialization. But eventually it spreads. And one of the first places it spreads to is the United States. The United States has the same conditions that Britain has favorable to growth. They have a lot of natural resources. They have a lot of rivers for power. They have a lot of rivers and natural ports to ship the goods elsewhere. And they have a lot of people. British machinery is going to be taken to the United States. They're going to copy those machines and create a huge textile industry. Now, instead of sending the cotton from the south of the United States across the sea to England for them to make clothing, they're going to send it to the northern factories to make clothing. And we're going to see this once you take American history. This is going to cause a huge divide between the North and South. The North becomes a manufacturing mecca. The South becomes a farming mecca. And that's one of the divides that we have that leads to the Civil War. It's going to expand very quickly in the 1800s with the growth of the railroad system. Eventually, we're going to have railroad tracks that run all over our great continent, and we're very fast in the building of our railroads. After it reaches the United States, it eventually reaches continental Europe, especially places like Germany, like France, like Belgium. At first, war delays growth of industry. We have the 100 Years' War, we have the 30 Years' War, and it keeps industrialization from happening within continental Europe, but eventually they start to industrialize. It'll start with Belgium and then it'll go to Germany. Other parts will develop through the mid 1800s. And the big problem is that this begins to have a worldwide impact on the rest of the world. Countries that industrialize are going to be quickly industrialized, and it's going to cause a huge gap in what they are able to accomplish compared to countries that do not industrialize. If you want to look at it, it's the same way in the world today. Compare the abilities of the United States to the Congo or the Central African Republic, or compare what the United States is capable of doing compared to a place like Kazakhstan or Guatemala or even North Korea, if you want to talk about unindustrialized nations. We have a huge economy. We have huge outputs. We have huge implications when it comes to like fighting wars. Compared to those countries, they would not be able to fight a war against the United States if we mobilized against them, because we just have industrialized tanks, we have industrialized planes, we have industrialized guns, we have industrialized boats and missiles and rockets, and we would be able to get all of those things moving very quickly compared to unindustrialized nations. We also see that these industrialized countries start to exploit overseas colonies in that vocabulary word we've looked at called imperialism. They're going to start imperializing these nations and exploiting them for their natural resources and then using them as markets to sell all of these goods that they are putting together. Eventually, standards of living are going to rise in industrialized nations, and it especially comes with OSHA and unionization, which we'll talk about on another video. But eventually, the standard of living rises, and you think like even poor people in the United States today have better lives than wealthy people, if you want to say, in some of the third world nations across the world. That's because the standard of living is so high in our country compared to other countries. There are some places in the world where you have to walk miles a day with empty jugs to get fresh water, whereas everywhere in the United States you can just turn a spigot and water comes out clean for you to drink. We'll talk about the age of reform in another video. I hope you've enjoyed this video. My name is Mr. Hosking. Stay flossy out there.